Alright, so we're going to get this bumper off. To get the bumper off, you'll need to peek inside your wheel wells. There's a few bolts. My inner fender's already messed up, but there should be a couple. There should be one here, and I believe one a little bit lower. But basically, you're just going to disconnect these outer securing bolts here. And then if you have an under tray, then you'll need to remove that. But that should basically be connected here and on these corners. So on this side, you can get a better idea. So you're going to disconnect there. Looks like there may have been one up in there at one point. I'm not sure, you'll just have to see, but basically your goal is to disconnect the painted portion from the under tray, and if you have a main under tray here, get that off as well. And then just make sure that you get any bolts out of the side here that are securing your bumper on. So we'll get those out of the way, and then right here is, so you can pop these trim pieces out. I think you just pull on them, but this is our main securing point. So there's two of these, one on each side. That is, I think they're calling it an E12, but looks like a Torx. So we need to get those two out, and then once you can get these two out, then the whole bumper should slide off. So once you get these corner pieces out of the way, you can actually come in. Hard to get a camera angle on, but you can come in, you can see right there. Can't get to focus, sorry. So you can see right on the side, you can hit that tab with a flat blade from the back, and that will pop out. So once you get this piece loose, then you got to get these guys loose. So you could try to grab that guy from the bottom and pull down, but really you kind of have to flex, and then you get a flat head, or to be really careful, a plastic trim popping tool, and you want to push that guy down from the top, the one on the left. As you can see, it's got a little shelf on it that's grabbing on. So you're going to do that on the top. You're going to do the same thing on the bottom. So if you just kind of very gently pry down, then you can get to the top of that. Okay, so now that those trim pieces are out of the way on both sides, excuse the rocks, this thing was really low when I bought it. You clean all that out. But now that those are both out of the way, you can see these guys right here, and this is a T50. So yeah, make sure that you got all your fender liner bolts out and under tray bolts out. These are the two main bolts holding this thing together. Alright, so we got our two vertical bumper bolts out. Now you're just going to kind of carefully lift and pull, and then as it's coming off, you want to support it. You can reach in here and unplug all of the lights and sensors and horns and everything that are in here holding this, that are still attached. So yeah, I'm going to reach in here and get everything unplugged, and then we'll have our bumper off. Okay, so bumper's off. As you can see, these are those spots where those big bolts were through. This is actually a height adjustment here. So if you've got a gap here you're trying to get rid of, or whatever, you can adjust those. Give you a little bit of a wide angle there. So now that our bumper's off, as part of our manual conversion, we're going to be removing this auxiliary fan and adding the E-fan that goes back here. I talked to quite a few people, and they said that if you leave both fans, it'll cause a restriction and some overheating on the track. So we're going to just run one fan, and that'll give us some room up here once we get this all apart to see if we can if we can find a spot to mount our cooler, and etc. So next I'm going to get this shroud off. Looks like there's a couple bolts up top, and we'll have to kind of walk around and see how it's mounted, but looks like we got some over here on the sides, so it looks like 2 here, 2 on the top. That might be it, so I'll let you know if I find one more. Okay, so we got our ducting off. These 2 on each side, the way that those clips were designed, I couldn't get them out without breaking them, so I'll probably have to get some small little screw inserts and then just put them back in with reusable metal screws in case I ever need to service this again. But the plastic ones, they were kind of an all-in-one piece type of a clip, and they were just so old that they just shattered when I tried to get them apart. But it is off. It looks like we're just held in by 4 nuts here for this auxiliary fan. I have already unplugged the wire, but the wire comes over here and plugs in. It's actually this one right there. So I've already unplugged it. We're going to use the same plug for our front fan. Operates on the same programming as far as I'm aware, so our new front fan should plug right in, no problems. So yeah, we're basically just gonna zip these 4 nuts off and get this fan out of the way, and then we'll start test fitting. Once you get those 4 nuts loose, you kind of have to give it a yank. It's a little bit seized on there, but that is all that's holding it. And then you kind of have to come out and down. That wire that ran up through here, kind of a pain in the butt. I had to pull it up and go over these lines, and then kind of had to loosen the headlights so that I had a little bit of wiggle, and finally it was able to come out, but it did fight me a little bit. So so here's what we're left with. So keeping in mind of airflow, we need to either mount our cooler low, our oil cooler low, so that the grills get it, or I'm going to get it out of the box. I really like to try to mount it up here in the main grill, because I think that would kind of look the coolest. It's got the M on it for Mishimoto. So I'm going to see if it'll fit here without interfering with the hood latches and everything else that's involved there. And I'm going to try to mount it high. If not, then we'll mount it low here, so that it gets airflow. If you mount it right in the center, it's really not going to get any airflow. The bumper's pretty much covering this whole center support bracket here. So I want my cooler to be centered. This upper shroud is not centered. It's off centered because of the latch here. And so in order for the cooler, I decided I'm going to put the cooler up here so it's in the grill. In order to do that, I had to trim, see if I can get a view of it. I trimmed this, there was kind of a swoop right here, so I trimmed this plastic out so that the cooler, and unfortunately the M is going to be upside down. I might repaint it, but and then I lopped one of these ears off of the cooler as well. I'll touch that up with some paint before I final install. But in order for it to be centered, it kind of has to sit right in that corner. And that will allow it to sit pretty dang close to center. What I'm going to do, it's It's going to take a little bit of fabrication. If you don't have the fabrication skills, you honestly could, with the way that these sit. If you wanted to move it to the left a little bit, you probably could drill some holes up through this metal on both sides and just hard mount it right there. That's one way to do it. These holes in the front have to stay open if you're using a stock intake system, just because they have like a pop clip that goes through them. But you could drill that back hole and just hard mount it right there, a bolt and nut through the metal. I have a welder and I have a vise and I have some metal, so I'm going to move mine over so that it sits center in the grill. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these studs that were holding the old fan, and I'm going to build a bracket of sorts to hold this up right here. But that's essentially how it's going to sit. Option 2, if you don't have fabrication skills, a welder, whatever, and you want it to sit center, you could get some of this pre-drilled L metal, and you might have to oblong the holes, but you get the idea. If you were to mount that like that and then notch out the center where the cooler is going to sit so that the back of the cooler doesn't hit, then you would essentially have some shelves that you could drill into and mount. So I didn't want to do that just because I think it's not going to look as nice. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a flat bar across here that will mount to these, and then I'm just going to weld 2 little shelves that can sit on. So I've got my bracket built here. Please don't judge my welding. I'm just a hobby welder, and I can weld good enough to get broken bolts out, but that's about it. But basically I just made a flat bar, and then the cooler came with some brackets that I was able to rebend and drill, and then I just welded those brackets on. So the cooler will mount. See if I can, see if I can do this one-handed here. The cooler will mount basically just like that, centered in the grill, and then yeah, so that's how she's going to sit. So that's basically how it's going to sit. The hood isn't latched 100%, but you get the idea. A little bit of paint on that bracket, and now, excuse me there, a little bit of paint on that bracket. Looks pretty nice. Obviously the M is upside down. We may or may not correct that. I don't know if I care that much. So next, I did have to trim up this shroud a little bit. So basically I just had to clean up those top. There was some little ductings in the top there that I cut. If you can see, I have to go in there and kind of clean those up a little bit. And then I'm going to cut this nose out of the middle, right there. I'm going to just cut it straight across just for the ducting. The hood's obviously still going to have its separation, but I feel like having this ducting cut out will help just in general funnel more air just around that, so, and through it, even with the hood grills being a little bit separate just because of the ducting that's already built in. I think that it will help. So I'm going to trim that. That'll be last. Before we do all that, we need to build our lines. If you're running a factory airbox, there's a couple ways you can go about it. So you could go down here and through and probably find yourself some routing right through here. You might have to cut that corner. For me, I'm not sure yet. I'm still running the factory Airbox. I'm going to see if I have room, but I might run them just down through this opening, and they would just come around here. I'm trying to keep in mind that there is some ducting that attaches from the bumper here, so we would have to kind of come up and over and then up and in here. So I decided to mount high just because I think I wanted to leave that space a little bit more available just for good airflow, and in case I want to add like another cooler, power steering, or something like that, I have some other room to do it. So next is line routing. So what we've got here is I'm running two 45-degree fittings. I'm kind of swooping them back, and then I'm gonna have to do some zip tying or get some of those double hose clamp devices to kind of keep everything together. But that little guy right there is what the stock Airbox sits on. So swooping them like this, and then they'll kind of come over and through here is kind of the way that they're going to end up being routed. I will be probably putting some sort of, rubber insulator or something on any of those sharp edges where they might rub. But that's the general idea. Here, I'll see if I can move this power steering so you can get a better idea. So yeah, basically 245 seems to do the trick. I tried 90s, I tried straights. I like this setup the best of all of them that I've tried. The straights were kind of making a rainbow, and were pretty kind of just in the way, so I didn't really love the straights. And the 90s, you can't really stack two 90s next to each other because they hit each other. So it seems like the 245s are probably our best bet, because they're going to basically land like that when it's all said and done. Okay, so we're all routed and connected here. Did have to trim up some of the hoses and repurpose some of the ends, just because I didn't want a whole bunch of extra hose everywhere. But this is basically how I have it routed. I ended up coming kind of right above this ducting here, and there's a little bit of flex, but plenty of room for that ducting to sit. There's a couple places that I need to add a little bit of rubber. What I'll do is I'll split some hose in half. I'll give myself a little bit of buffer there just because there's a sharp edge. Don't want it to wear on it. And then again right here under here, and then this is how I have it routed, so it comes around like this so it doesn't interfere with the Airbox. This coolant hose here concerns me just a little bit, so I will probably wrap a little bit of a buffer in there as well, or if I can figure out a way to just kind of secure this up just a touch so it doesn't hit it. But I think I might order some of those hose keepers. They're like a double eyelet with a Allen in the middle, instead of these zip ties, but for now this is going to get me by. So but that's essentially how we're set up right now. We're all routed, and we're just gonna clean everything up. This still needs some sort of bracketry built, but I will, that's the least of my worries at the moment. I'll probably add some buffer there with some hose as well, just so that doesn't get rubbed on. But yeah, we're pretty close to being able to get some fluid in this thing and start it up and just double check everything for leaks. So for spots like this where we're going to run into rubbing, and up there where it passes over this pinch weld, and then there's a few spots in there, but anywhere where you're concerned this is going to rub and not be happy, I'm just going to have an old radiator hose here. Anything like this will work, just something with a big diameter. I'm just going to cut some sections off and then split them in half, and then I'll just wrap those around with zip ties. Maybe not the whole way, but at least half, just to kind of cover those spots, give them a little extra insulation. So it's pretty simple. I did have a few of these metal zip ties. These are really good to have around, so I went ahead and threw one on here just for strength, in case over time these plastic ones get brittle, just to give it some, a little extra. And I'll probably do that in a few other spots, but for now we're going to trim this up and get some insulators in here. So that's kind of an example of what I was talking about. So we just added a little bit of hose in those spots where it might rub. I'm going to go up top and probably add a couple more just where it's on the, or at least one more where it's on the coolant pipe up there, just so that it doesn't rub through. But yeah, after that we'll prime the motor. I added a little buffer here, this isn't like tight against that, but I didn't want that to rub and become a problem. So instead of building a whole bracket system, there's really not any great bolts down there. The only one I saw was that one for the tensioner, and it's kind of a weird angle. So what I ended up doing is I have these little 90-degree brackets. I had two of them, and a big hose clamp, and I just clamped them to the oil filter housing. So for my car, that's going to work great. If you want to build a bracket, be my guest. This thing is solid, not going anywhere, so it'll work really well for my purposes. But yeah, we're all remounted, so I'm getting ready to do coolant, oil. Okay, being that this is a brand new oil filter housing and I've had the oil pan off, I went ahead and pulled the filter out, and I went ahead and filled this up with oil, and I'm letting it kind of settle down. There's some crevices in the bottom that it's filling through, kind of back through some of the oil passages in it. I probably put roughly a quart in here so far. It already went down once. It looks like it's kind of starting to slow down. I'll probably put the filter in it at this point, and then put the rest in the regular oil, and I think that'll help us. Prime, hopefully, not make it so difficult to get oil through everything, and get rid of some of those air blockages in the passages. Okay, I wanted to show you how I trim my shroud. I wanted to keep the shroud because I still like the idea of the ducting coming through, but I basically just chopped the nose out of it there, and then just threw a notch in it right there for the hoses to come through. And then I just got some normal panel pop clips that I'm going to use to secure it there. This hole will still be, this hole will still be able to be secured. This one will not. So after I get everything secured, I'm pretty confident that it'll be alright, but if not, I might figure out a way to throw a securing tab somewhere in here without interfering with the hood latch. So we'll see. I think we got plenty of room. Who knows, maybe I'll just throw a zip tie around that, being that it's a track car and I'm not too worried about it looking pretty. But I think that something up in this area would be helpful, just since we lost this mounting hole. So but yeah, that's basically how it's gonna look behind the bumper. Excuse the mess, we're still cleaning up. So we're going to prime the motor now, and in order to do that we need to disable the fuel pump and so that the engine doesn't try to fire. In order to do that, we are going to come into the glove box here, and there are two of these little tabs here that you're going to twist. So we'll twist them. And our fuse box is going to come down. Okay, so right on the bottom of this, there's this handy little cheat sheet that pops out. It's alphabetical. So we're going to come over here to F, and fuel pump says is fuse 54. And then we have this handy map up here. And we see that fuse 54 is a 20 amp fuse, 2 over from the center. So that tells us that it's this guy right here. So we're going to pull that, and then we should be able to crank this over without it starting. Okay, so this light up here is our oil pressure light. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put our foot on the clutch and crank the motor over until that light turns off. Now you don't want to overheat your starter, so if it takes a while, you know, give it 5 or 10 seconds at a time, let it cool off for 5 or 10 seconds, and then you can go kind of back and forth. Okay, so after a couple, probably took 3 or 4 cycles, key on and off, the oil pressure light finally chilled out here. Finally went off, so. Oh, there you go. So that tells us that we have oil pressure. After we confirm that we have oil pressure, I've come back through here, inspected all my fittings. I actually used oil dye in the oil that I was using so that I could shut the lights off and shine it around and look for leaks. No leaks yet. So next thing, we're gonna put our airbox back in. So we don't have any major leaks, so that's out of the way. You know, if something was a little bit loose, it'd be spraying oil by now. So we're going to put our airbags back on, plug in our mass airflow sensor, replace that fuse, and then start this thing up. We're going to let it run on the rack for a while, burp the coolant, and then just continue to monitor for any oil leaks. And then beyond that, you're done as far as this portion goes. All right, one final thought here. After having everything back together, shutting the hood very carefully with a flashlight, and then I actually put a paper towel, you could do aluminum foil or whatever, across this, shut the hood, just to kind of see where it was landing. As you can see, there's a divot right there for the lid of that power steering reservoir. In my initial tests, I was hitting a little bit up here, and so I just loosened that hose clamp and just rotated this all the way around. I wanted to give you kind of an above look. You want to make sure that they're kind of in line with each other there. I originally had it rotated forward just a titch, a little closer here, but after rotating it back and getting it to about that level, it fits much better. No interference with the hood or anything like that. So if you have installed your cooler like I have up high, and you're planning on using the stock Airbox, we're going to run into a small problem, and that problem being that the factory intake gets its air from here, and so in general the air would scoop in and go up and over. I mounted mine up high because I wanted to leave room for intercooler or something like that in the future, as this is kind of a continuing project. If you are only doing an oil cooler and not planning on doing anything else, you'd probably be better off to mount this cooler down low, here in this grate somewhere. I like this spot for me because I think it gives more airflow, and like I said, I wanted to leave room for additional coolers. If you're going to run some sort of cold air intake system with a cone filter, this doesn't matter. This is fine. I'm going to run my stock box for quite a while. So what I'm going to do to make sure that this isn't going to get suffocated by this cooler, there's two things I could have done. Number one is I could have dropped the cooler a few inches, but then I would have blocked the bottom portion. Or I can trim this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to lop this off like so, to open that up, and then since this still wants to marry downwards towards the cooler, I'm probably going to just trim the top like so, so that instead of sucking from the bottom, it's going to essentially turn this into a big scoop and scoop in, if that makes sense. I trimmed this up, so instead of it facing down and trying to suck air from right here, I just went ahead and opened it up, and then I cut the top of this back, and then up on the hood, these were already starting to kind of fall apart, but I just basically trimmed the top little ducting lashes off of there. And what that's going to allow is the air is still going to duct in, and it's going to go through and then over and in so it can breathe.